Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive.
It's great to be here.
Today we're diving into a really impactful Supreme Court case.
Oh, yeah. Definitely impactful.
Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization.
Big one.
The case that overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey.
Two huge precedents in this area of law.
For almost 50 years, Roe and Casey were like the foundation of abortion rights in the U.S.
Absolutely. Those cases shaped the legal landscape for decades.
Roe came first decided back in 73.
1973.
It established a constitutional right to abortion.
A landmark ruling for sure.
Then came Casey in 92.
1992.
It upheld that right from Roe.
Right.
But it also introduced this thing called the undue burden standard.
Which added another layer of complexity to the whole debate.
But then Dobbs came along and kind of shook everything up.
Yeah, it really flipped the script on abortion law in America.
It's a fascinating case, especially how the court went about overturning those precedents. It wasn't just about legal arguments. It was like a deep dive into history.
Right. They went way back.
Examining legal texts and societal attitudes towards abortion going back centuries.
They really wanted to understand the historical context.
Now you might be wondering,
Yeah.
why does history matter so much in a case about abortion today?
It's a good question.
Well, the court argued that to figure out if a right is truly, fundamental and protected by the Constitution,
Okay.
it needs to be deeply rooted in American history and tradition.
That was their key argument.
And they decided that the right to abortion just didn't pass that test.
Interesting.
The majority opinion really hammered this point home.
Yeah, they cited a lot of historical sources
Like legal scholars like Blackstone and Hale.
who were pretty influential in their time.
They viewed abortion, especially after quickening,
That's when the pregnant person can feel the fetus moving,
as a serious offense.
the major no-no.
They also pointed out that by the time the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868,
Okay.
most states already had laws restricting abortion.
So they were arguing there was a historical precedent for regulating abortion.
They basically painted this picture of abortion being mostly criminalized throughout American history.
Right, trying to show that Roe and Casey were deviations from the norm.
But some legal experts push back on that,
Yeah, they argue that the court's historical analysis was a bit selective
like cherry-picking certain periods in legal interpretations.
and downplaying others that didn't fit their narrative.
It definitely makes you think about how the court uses history to justify its decisions.
It raises some important questions about their methodology.
Some people see it as a genuine attempt at originalism.
Trying to interpret the Constitution as it was understood back then.
Others see it as a more strategic move.
Using history to support a predetermined outcome.
It's like they were trying to rewrite the story of abortion in America.
Emphasizing its criminal past to undermine its legality today.
And this whole historical focus wasn't the only reason for overturning Roe and Casey.
Right. They had other issues with those precedents, too.
They also went after the viability line and the undue burden standard,
Yeah, those were key parts of the Roe and Casey framework.
arguing that they were flawed and just didn't work in practice.
They really wanted to dismantle that whole structure.
So let's break those down a bit.
Okay.
The viability line basically said states couldn't ban abortion before a fetus could survive outside the womb.
Which is usually around 24 weeks.
But the court found this line to be arbitrary.
And lacking a solid basis in science or history.
They said relying on viability just caused confusion and inconsistency,
Because medical technology is always changing.
making it hard to say exactly when a fetus can survive outside the womb.
It's a moving target.
And then they went after the undue burden standard from Casey.
Which was meant to protect access to abortion.
They argued it was too vague.
And led to subjective interpretations.
The undue burden standard was supposed to prevent states from putting restrictions on abortion.
Yeah, restrictions that created a substantial obstacle for someone seeking an abortion.
But the court felt that standard wasn't clear enough.
And it led to a ton of legal battles over what exactly an undue burden was. Like, what does that even mean?
Exactly.
It became a point of contention.
They pointed to disagreements among lower courts as proof
That the standard wasn't working.
that it was causing more confusion than clarity.
Basically, the court was saying both the viability line and the undue burden standard are a mess and they gotta go.
So they chucked out the framework that governed abortion rights for decades.
A major shift in the legal landscape.
And what do they replace it with?
Well, not a whole lot.
They basically said it's up to each state to decide how to regulate or even ban abortion.
Wow, so a huge decentralization of power.
Which is a massive change.
It basically shifted the power from federal courts to state legislatures.
Creating this situation where abortion access could be totally different depending on where you live.
It's like a patchwork of laws across the country.
Now that we get the court's logic,
Right.
let's explore what this means for people seeking abortion access across the country.
It gets really interesting.
And maybe a little unsettling.
Definitely a lot to unpack there.
Okay, so the Supreme Court's made its decision. Roe and Casey are overturned.
Yeah, a major turning point.
And now it's up to each state to decide what happens with abortion access.
Each state gets to make its own rules.
You might be thinking, well, how different can things really be from state to state?
It's like it's all still America.
But that's where things get a lot more complicated.
Yeah, it's not a simple picture.
The truth is we're now in a country where your ability to get an abortion
To access abortion care.
really depends on where you live.
Yeah, your zip code can make a huge difference.
It's almost like we've gone back in time before Roe.
Back when some states were way more restrictive than others.
And we're not just talking about small differences in regulation.
No, this is much bigger than that.
Some states are basically banning abortion completely,
Near total bans.
while others are trying to protect and expand access.
It's a stark contrast.
And those bans aren't just talk.
Right, they have real consequences.
We're seeing states where performing an abortion is now a felony.
A serious crime.
Doctors could face prison sentences.
It's creating a lot of fear and uncertainty for healthcare providers.
It's understandable why doctors would be hesitant to offer abortion services now.
Even in cases where they believe it's medically necessary.
Imagine you're a doctor in one of those states.
You've dedicated your life to medicine.
You've trained for years. You've taken an oath to care for your patients.
Do no harm.
And now you could go to jail for providing a procedure that was legal just a few months ago.
It's a moral dilemma.
A legal minefield.
Absolute.
And it's not just affecting doctors.
Right, the impact goes far beyond the medical community.
Think about the people who live in these states with restrictive laws.
The individuals who need access to abortion care.
What happens if they need an abortion?
What options do they have?
Some are forced to travel to other states
States where abortion is still legal.
to get the care they need.
Sometimes they have to travel hundreds, even thousands of miles,
Facing financial hardship and logistical hurdles.
all just to exercise their right to choose.
And this is where we run into the issue of interstate conflicts.
States trying to control what their residents do in other states.
States with restrictive laws are trying to stop their residents from getting abortions elsewhere.
Some are even proposing laws to punish people who help others travel out of state for abortion care.
It raises questions about how far states can go.
About the limits of state power.
Can one state really tell its residents what they can and can't do in another state?
It's a tricky legal question.
And what about the impact on families?
Especially families with limited resources.
Imagine having to take time off work, find childcare, come up with the money for travel and lodging.
All while dealing with the emotional and physical stress of an unplanned pregnancy.
It's a huge burden,
A burden that falls hardest on those who are already struggling,
making existing inequalities in healthcare even worse.
exacerbating those disparities.
And it's not just about surgical abortion.
There's also the fight over medication abortion,
Right. Medication abortion has become more and more common.
using pills like mifepristone and misoprostol,
It's often seen as a safer, more private option.
especially for early pregnancies.
But even medication abortion is facing legal challenges now,
Some states are trying to restrict access to these pills,
making it harder to get them,
banning telehealth consultations for medication abortion.
making it harder to get them through the mail.
They say it's about protecting women's health,
But critics say it's just another way to limit access to abortion.
regardless of the method.
It's a really complicated legal situation.
State laws clashing with federal regulations.
The FDA has approved mifepristone for medication abortion.
But some states are still trying to restrict or ban it.
It's a legal tug of war.
And the courts are going to have to figure it out.
And all this is happening in a super polarized political climate.
The abortion debate is more heated than ever.
The Dobbs decision has just poured gasoline on the fire.
It's playing a huge role in elections at every level of government.
We're seeing massive protests, intense lobbying, and a surge in political activism on both sides.
A very divisive issue.
So where does this all leave us?
What's the future of abortion access in a post-Roe America?
That's the question we'll tackle in the final part of our deep dive.
It's a big one.
We spent this deep dive looking at what happened after Dobbs,
A fallout, yeah.
all the legal stuff, the logistical stuff,
Trigger laws, interstate conflicts, medication, abortion.
It's been a lot.
A lot to take in, for sure.
But what about the bigger picture?
Zooming out a bit.
How is this decision changing America?
Reshaping society, our politics.
Even our idea of what basic rights are.
It's a huge question.
It's a real turning point.
A watershed moment.
Dobbs hasn't just changed the law.
Right. It goes beyond that.
It's brought back these debates about individual liberty.
The role of the court.
The whole idea of federalism.
States' rights versus federal power.
And these aren't just like theoretical ideas.
No, they have real-world implications.
So especially for healthcare.
Healthcare access is a big one.
Think about the ripple effects beyond abortion.
All the potential consequences.
The logic the court used in Dobbs.
The reasoning they laid out.
Especially that focus on deeply rooted rights. It has some legal experts worried.
Worried that other rights could be at risk.
Other rights based on the 14th Amendment.
Like access to contraception?
In vitro fertilization, things people rely on.
Things we often take for granted.
If the right to privacy, which was a big part of Roe,
The foundation of Roe?
if that can be overturned,
So easily.
what's to stop the court from going after other precedents?
Other rulings that use similar logic.
It creates a lot of uncertainty.
For individuals, for families.
People trying to plan their families make decisions about their reproductive health.
It's unsettling.
It also raises questions about the balance of power.
Between the federal government and the states.
Dobbs basically gave states more power over abortion,
Shifting decision-making to state legislatures.
which means now we have all these different laws across the country.
A patchwork of laws.
A real legal maze.
It creates a lot of new challenges.
People in states with restrictive laws might have to travel to other states for care.
Long distances adding financial and logistical burdens.
And raises the question, can states stop their residents from doing that?
Can they punish people who help them travel for abortion care?
It's almost like we're back to the days before Roe,
When safe and legal abortion wasn't a guaranteed right,
when women's choices were limited by where they lived.
and by their circumstance.
It's crucial to remember the human cost of all this.
The real people affected by these legal battles.
We're not just talking about abstract ideas.
We're talking about real lives.
Doctors facing criminal charges for providing care.
Women making tough choices with limited options.
Families trying to navigate a system that can feel hostile.
These are the stories that often get lost.
Lost in the legal and political arguments.
It's easy to forget about the human impact.
The Dobbs decision has created this feeling of unease.
Uncertainty about the future.
No one knows for sure what's going to happen with abortion access in America.
It's a big unknown.
Will more states ban abortion completely?
Will Congress pass a federal law?
Will the Supreme Court revisit this issue?
So many questions.
It's a time for some serious reflection.
A time to think about our values.
What kind of society do we want?
What does it mean to have control over our own bodies?
To have the freedom to make our own choices about our reproductive lives?
That's a fundamental question.
And how do we balance individual rights with the values and beliefs of a diverse nation?
Finding that balance is key.
These are tough questions.
No easy answers.
But Dobbs has forced us to face them.
To have these conversations.
And we can't shy away from them.
We need to engage with these issues.
So here's a question for you to think about.
To ponder as we wrap up.
If you had to create a federal law on abortion, what would it look like?
What approach would you take?
What challenges would you face?
Something to consider.
As we try to understand the impact of Dobbs.
And figure out the future of reproductive rights in America.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
It's been a great discussion.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.